You learned to pack a bag before most kids learned to tie their shoes. You became fluent in two versions of the same story. You mastered the art of loving two people who couldn't love each other anymore. And somewhere along the way, you stopped being a child and became a mediator, a messenger, a keeper of secrets, a student of anger, and a scholar of silence. Most people think divorce affects children during the separation. The fights, the tears, the moving trucks. But what they don't see is how it rewires your nervous system for years, sometimes decades afterward. How it shapes the way you love, the way you trust, and the way you show up in every relationship you'll ever have. In this video, we're going to explore the hidden psychology of children of divorce. Not the obvious pain, but the subtle patterns most people never recognize. The ways you learned to survive that are now keeping you stuck. And most importantly, how to finally stop carrying the weight of a war that was never yours to fight. If you grew up in two homes, but never felt fully at home in either one, this is for you. Let me describe something you might never have put into words. You remember the exact moment you realized your family wasn't coming back together. Maybe it was when your dad picked you up from your mom's house and didn't come inside. Maybe it was when you stopped saying "my parents" and started saying "my mom" or "my dad," always singular, never plural. Or maybe it was subtler than that. Maybe it was the first time you edited a story so it wouldn't upset whoever you were with. The first time you pretended to be happier than you were so your parents wouldn't feel guilty. The first time you realized you couldn't talk about one parent to the other without tension filling the room. You became a translator between two worlds. And in that process, you learned skills that children shouldn't have to learn. You learned to read emotions with surgical precision. One look at your mom's face and you knew whether it was safe to mention your weekend with dad. One tone shift in your dad's voice and you knew to stop talking about mom's new boyfriend. You became hyper-aware, hyper-vigilant, always scanning for emotional landmines. You learn that love is conditional and complicated, that people who promise forever can leave, that homes aren't permanent, that family photos lie. And here's what most people don't understand. The divorce didn't just happen once. It happened over and over again. Every Christmas where you had to choose, every birthday split into two celebrations, every school event where you worried about whether they'd both show up or if you'd have to manage the awkwardness if they did. You learned that you couldn't make everyone happy, that choosing one parent meant disappointing the other, that your existence became evidence in a trial you didn't ask to be part of. Some of you became caretakers, the emotional support for a heartbroken parent who leaned on you too heavily. You heard things children shouldn't hear. You comforted pain you didn't cause. You became smaller, so someone else's grief could be bigger. Others became invisible, the good kid who never caused problems because your parents already had enough to deal with. You learned that your needs were secondary, that asking for attention was selfish, that keeping the peace was more important than being honest. And a few of you became the problem, the acting out, the anger, the rebellion. Because sometimes being the problem is the only way to make people pay attention. Sometimes bad attention is better than no attention at all. But no matter which role you played, you learned the same fundamental lesson. Relationships are fragile. People leave. Love doesn't last. And you have to be ready to lose anyone at any time. That lesson didn't just affect your childhood. It's affecting you right now. Now, if you're watching this and thinking, Wait, I thought I was over this. The divorce was decades ago. I've moved on. Let me ask you something. Do you struggle with commitment because you're waiting for the other person to leave? Do you have trouble believing someone when they say they love you? Do you keep emotional exit strategies in every relationship, just in case? Do you overfunction in relationships, trying to be perfect, low maintenance, easy to love, because you're terrified of being too much? Or do you underfunction, keeping people at arm's length, never fully letting them in, because distance feels safer than intimacy? Do you find yourself playing mediator in every conflict, exhausting yourself to keep the peace? Do you struggle to take sides, always seeing both perspectives, unable to stand firmly in your own truth? These aren't random personality traits. These are adaptive strategies you developed as a child, and they're still running in the background of your adult life. You didn't just witness a divorce, you absorbed it. It became part of your psychological wiring. And before you can heal, you need to understand exactly how deep that wiring goes. Let's start with what happens to your brain when your family splits apart. Attachment theory teaches us that children need consistent, reliable caregivers to develop secure attachment, the foundation for healthy relationships later in life. But divorce disrupts this consistency in profound ways. Suddenly, the people you depended on are no longer a team. Your primary sources of safety are now separate, often conflicting entities, and your brain has to adapt to this new reality. For many children of divorce, this creates what psychologists call anxious attachment. You learned that people you love can disappear, that relationships are unpredictable, that you need to constantly monitor connection to prevent abandonment. As an adult, this shows up as relationship anxiety. You read into every text. You panic when someone pulls away even slightly. You need constant reassurance that you're still loved, still wanted, still chosen. Not because you're needy, but because your nervous system learned that love is conditional and temporary. Others develop avoidant attachment, the opposite response to the same wound. You learned that depending on people is dangerous, that emotional investment leads to pain, that the safest way to love is from a distance. As an adult, you struggle with intimacy. You feel suffocated when someone gets too close. You pull away when relationships get serious. You tell yourself you like being independent, but really, you're protecting yourself from the possibility of being left again. And then there's disorganized attachment, when your parents were both sources of comfort and sources of fear. When the divorce was messy, when you witnessed violence or volatility, when love and fear became intertwined. As an adult, this creates a pattern of simultaneous craving and fearing intimacy. You want closeness, but don't know how to sustain it. You chase and then run. You love and then panic. Your relationships feel chaotic because the template for love you internalized was chaotic. None of this is your fault. These are survival adaptations your young brain made to cope with an impossible situation. But attachment isn't the only wound divorce creates. There's another psychological injury that's rarely discussed: the loyalty bind. When your parents divorced, you were put in an impossible position. Loving one parent felt like betraying the other. Enjoying time with dad felt like abandoning mom. Being happy at mom's house felt disloyal to dad. Psychologists call this loyalty conflict, and it does something devastating to a child's sense of self. Because children can't hold the complexity of, I can love both parents even though they don't love each other. So instead, they split themselves. You became one version of yourself at mom's house and another at dad's. You learned to code switch, to shapeshift, to be whoever you needed to be to keep both parents happy. And in that process, you lost touch with who you actually were. This is why so many adult children of divorce struggle with identity. You spent your formative years being adaptable instead of authentic. You learned that your real self might upset someone, so you became a chameleon. And now, as an adult, you struggle to know what you actually want. You defer to other people's preferences. You change your opinions depending on who you're with. You're so good at adapting that you've lost the ability to be yourself. There's also the guilt. The deep, persistent guilt that follows children of divorce into adulthood. Guilt for not being enough to keep the family together. Guilt for enjoying your life while your parents were suffering. Guilt for choosing one parent's event over the others. Guilt for moving on when they couldn't. This guilt isn't rational, but it's real, and it shapes how you show up in relationships. You over-apologize, you accommodate, you sacrifice your needs to avoid burdening others. Because deep down, you still believe that your existence is somehow a problem that needs to be managed. Now let's talk about how all of this shows up in your life today, the patterns you might not have connected back to divorce. You tell yourself you're not ready or haven't found the right person, but the truth is deeper. You're terrified of building something that could fall apart. You watched your parents forever crumble. You learned that marriage vows are breakable, that white picket fences can turn into war zones. So you keep your options open, keep one foot out the door, keep your heart just guarded enough that if it ends, you'll survive. You witnessed what happens when people fight. You saw how quickly love can turn to resentment. So now, as an adult, you avoid conflict at all costs. You bottle up frustrations. You say, "It's fine," when it's not fine. You'd rather silently resent someone than risk the volatility of disagreement. And your relationships die slowly from unexpressed truth rather than explosively from conflict. You learned that relationships are fragile and require constant maintenance. So, you try to be the perfect partner. Never needy, never demanding, never difficult. You perform love instead of simply being loved. You work exhaustingly hard to be enough because you're terrified that if you're not perfect, they'll leave, just like your parents did. Holidays, weddings, family gatherings, these aren't celebrations for you. They're minefields, because every milestone reminds you of fractured family. Every wedding makes you wonder if it'll last. Every happy family photo feels like a performance. You smile for the camera, but inside, you're bracing for the inevitable fracture. You don't just have trouble trusting romantic partners. You struggle to trust that anything good will last. You wait for the other shoe to drop. You catastrophize. You scan for signs of ending before the beginning has even solidified. Your hypervigilance, learned in childhood to protect yourself from parental conflict, now prevents you from ever fully relaxing into love. These aren't character flaws. These are adaptive strategies that worked when you were a child. The problem is, they're still running your adult life. And it's time to update the programming. Here's the truth that might surprise you. Healing from childhood divorce doesn't mean pretending it didn't affect you. It doesn't mean forgiving people who haven't apologized. It doesn't mean getting over it. Healing means recognizing which survival strategies you're still using that no longer serve you. It means separating your parents' relationship failure from your own relationship potential. It means learning that you can be loyal to yourself without betraying anyone else. What I'm about to share isn't about blaming your parents or dwelling in victimhood. It's about understanding the patterns that shaped you so you can consciously choose new ones. Because the child in you who learned to survive a broken home is still trying to protect you. But you're not that child anymore, and you don't need those protections anymore. Let's talk about how to actually heal. Gentle but important. The first step is to grieve, not just what ended, but what never existed in the first place. You never got an intact family. You never got parents who modeled healthy conflict resolution. You never got the luxury of being just a kid, carefree, unburdened, innocent of adult pain. Most adult children of divorce skip this step. They minimize. It wasn't that bad. Other people had it worse. I'm fine. But minimizing doesn't heal. It just buries the wound deeper. Give yourself permission to grieve. Not for attention, not for sympathy, but because that grief is real and it deserves acknowledgement. You can grieve and still love your parents. You can acknowledge the loss and still appreciate what you did have. Grief and gratitude can coexist, but you have to let yourself feel the grief first. Write a letter you'll never send, to the family that never was, to the childhood you deserved, to the innocence you lost. Let yourself say everything you never got to say. And then, when you're ready, release it. Second, you need to release yourself from the loyalty bind. For years, you believed that loyalty to one parent meant betrayal of the other, that loving yourself fully meant choosing sides, that building your own happy relationship somehow invalidated your parents' pain. Here's the new truth. You can love both parents without being responsible for their relationship. You can build a healthy partnership without betraying the memory of their failed one. You can be happy even though they weren't. Loyalty to your parents doesn't mean staying small so they feel better. It doesn't mean repeating their patterns to honor them. It doesn't mean sacrificing your own relationship potential out of guilt. True loyalty means learning from their mistakes without repeating them. It means building the relationship they couldn't build. It means proving that their divorce doesn't have to define your capacity for love. Practice saying, I can love them both and still choose differently for myself. I can honor their pain and still pursue my own joy. I am not bound by their story. Third, you need to consciously reparent your attachment wounds. If you developed anxious attachment, your work is learning that love doesn't require constant proof, that someone can be away from you without leaving you, that space in a relationship doesn't mean abandonment. Practice tolerating small separations without panic. When your partner doesn't text back immediately, resist the urge to spiral. Tell yourself, they're busy. This is normal. I am safe. Train your nervous system that connection can flex without breaking. If you developed avoidant attachment, your work is learning that intimacy doesn't mean entrapment, that vulnerability doesn't guarantee pain, that letting someone in won't necessarily destroy you. Practice staying present when you want to run. When someone gets close and your instinct is to pull away, pause. Ask yourself, am I actually unsafe? Or does this feel unsafe because it's unfamiliar? Train your nervous system that closeness can be safe. This work is slow, it's uncomfortable, but every time you choose differently than your conditioning, you're rewriting the script divorce wrote for you. Fourth, recognize that your parents' relationship isn't your blueprint. Just because their marriage failed doesn't mean yours will. Just because they couldn't navigate conflict doesn't mean you can't. Just because they fell out of love doesn't mean love is temporary. You are not destined to repeat their patterns, but you have to actively create new ones. Study healthy relationships. Read about secure attachment. Go to therapy. Learn conflict resolution skills your parents never modeled. Commit to doing the work they didn't do. Your relationship doesn't have to look like theirs. You get to build something different, something better, something whole. Finally, you need to reclaim the parts of yourself you split to survive. Describing fragmentation. You learned to be one person at mom's house and another at dad's. You learned to hide parts of yourself to keep the peace. You learned that your fullness was too much, so you became fragments. Defining healing. Healing means integration. Bringing all the scattered pieces back together, allowing yourself to be complex, contradictory, complete, not just the easy, adaptable version you learned to perform.
In questions. Reflective.
Ask yourself, what parts of me did I hide? What did I stop expressing to avoid making things worse? What needs did I silence? What dreams did I abandon because my family was too busy fracturing, empowering, building? And then, gently, start expressing those parts again. Take up space. Have needs. Be inconvenient sometimes. Be human, not just helpful. Liberating permission. Emphasis. You don't have to be easy to love anymore. You can be real. You can be whole. Whisper. Powerful. You can be you. Here's the deepest truth about growing up with divorced parents. You learned too early that nothing lasts forever, that love can end, that families can fracture, that the people you depend on can stop depending on each other. And yes, that knowledge created wounds. Wounds that shaped your attachment style, your relationship patterns, your capacity for trust. But those same wounds also gave you gifts. You developed emotional intelligence that most people never achieve. You learned to read people, to navigate complexity, to hold space for pain. You became resilient in ways others can't comprehend. The child who survived your parents' divorce is the same person who now has the capacity to build something they couldn't. The awareness you gained from witnessing their failure is the wisdom you need to create your own success. You are not broken. You are not damaged goods. You are not destined to repeat their story. You are someone who learned about love the hard way, and that makes you someone who can love with intention, with consciousness, with hard-won wisdom. Your parents' divorce was their ending. It doesn't have to be your beginning. If you saw yourself in this video, know that you're not alone. Millions of us are learning to build relationships from the rubble of our parents' broken ones. And we're doing it. Imperfectly, bravely, consciously. If this resonated, watch my video on the psychology of people who feel like strangers in their own family. It goes even deeper into these patterns. Subscribe if you want psychology that actually makes sense of your story. And share your experience in the comments. Sometimes just saying it out loud starts the healing. Your parents' divorce doesn't define your capacity for love. It just taught you what not to do. And that is exactly what you needed to learn.